Throughout World War II, there were a number of religious figures, such as nuns and priests, who were executed during the conflict. There were a collection of nuns who were even shot dead by the German army, but the persecution regarding religion was rife and was instigated heavily by the SS. Thousands of people were imprisoned inside of concentration camps such as Auschwitz, Dachau and Buchenwald, and inside of these there were many religious figures. Inside Dachau there was even a priest barracks, and the priests were allowed their own form of chapel at some point. Because of the evil actions of the Nazis, and the fact many were executed at the hands of the SS and the Einsatzgruppen, as well as the camp's guards, there were many people who became saints during the conflict, being killed for their religious beliefs. One such woman was Maria Skobtsova, who was also known as Mother Maria. She today is considered a saint for her actions during the conflict, but she would never live to see out the Second World War, as she died weeks before it ended in Ravensbruck, at the all-female concentration camp she was sent to before it was liberated. Join us today to look at the execution of the nuns sent to the gas chambers, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Maria Skobtsova was actually born Elizaveta Yurinieva Pilenko in 1891 inside of Riga, which today is in Latvia. When she was born, it was part of the Russian Empire. However, her father died when she was just a teenager, and because of this she began to question religion, and she became atheist, turning her back on God and her faith. But then in 1906 she moved with her mother and her siblings to St. Petersburg, and whilst here she mixed in a number of different circles, including rubbing shoulders with intellectuals. But whilst there in 1910 she married a Bolshevik, Dmitry Kuzmin Karaveyev. At this time she became involved in writing, and she wrote much poetry, and would share it with like-minded individuals, and she even published a book at the time of her writings. But within 3 years her marriage had gone wrong and had come to an end, with her husband becoming a Catholic convert, and he then also became a Catholic priest. But with this, Maria began to revert back to Christianity and her faith that she had previously abandoned. She moved along with her daughter to the south of Russia, and she began to indulge much more in her religious beliefs, but she also rebelled against others at the time because of what was happening in the Soviet Union or Russia. Leon Trotsky was closing down the Social Revolutionary Party Congress, and Maria even planned to assassinate Trotsky for this, but she was then told to think twice about this and was put off. But still going under the name Elizaveta, she was clearly quite a political dissident and official, but in 1918, following the Bolshevik Revolution, she became elected the deputy mayor of Anapa in southern Russia. She then became the mayor of the town as the White Army took control of the Reds, and with this she was placed on trial for being a Bolshevik. For this, Elizaveta could have been executed by the Whites who were at war with the Communists, but luckily for her the person judging her trial was a former teacher, and she was then acquitted, and she fell in love with this teacher who saved her, and they then got married. But things were changing heavily in Russia, and to avoid peril, Elizaveta, along with her daughter, mother and husband, then fled the country, with Elizaveta pregnant with her second child. They moved to Georgia where she gave birth to a son, then went on to Yugoslavia, before the family arrived in Paris in 1923. But then she continued to work and devote herself to helping others, and she mustered enough money to send her daughter to a boarding school, but yet again her marriage was failing and was breaking down. Her son went to live with her husband, and Elizaveta then devoted her life in Paris to helping others, and those who were poor and suffering. But as she was now a strong Catholic, her local bishop then encouraged her to take her religious devotion further, and he encouraged her to take vows and then to become a nun. She was worried about living inside of a nunnery, and she did not want to be cut off from the rest of the world, but she was told she did not need to do this. But she then took the monastic vows, and she took the religious name of Maria, being known as Sister Maria, and then she rented a house in Paris. This house inside of the French capital became a hub for the needy and the refugees, who would stay there for a short time before they got back on their feet, and Maria would help them out, feeding the poor, and also talking to them about religion at times. The work she did eventually turned the house into a large settlement, with many other buildings being used for other people in need. There were 120 dinners served each day by the group, and Sister Maria became known for collecting food for the needy that could be used in the house. Everybody loved her and thought she was fantastic. However, the Second World War turned her whole life upside down. As the Nazis invaded Poland and turned their attention to France, she realised the Nazi threat to her. She said, "If the Germans take Paris, I shall stay here with my old women. Where else could I send them?" She thought the Nazis were new pagans, and thought their war would bring more persecution and a great deal of bloodshed, and she believed that they would bring death to Europe. Paris would fall to the Germans on the 14th of June 1940, and a week later the whole of France fell and surrendered, and there was a huge degree of poverty and hunger across the nation. Paris also became a prison for many people, and many close friends of Sister Maria were rounded up and were arrested by the Gestapo. Russian refugees such as Maria were also being targeted, and the Nazis issued special cards for those of Russian origin living in France, but Sister Maria refused to comply and register, despite the fact she knew she would be punished. As time went on, Jews were also being denied freedoms across the country, and there were mass roundups of Jews across France. The treatment was terrible, as they were neglected heavily, and were sent to concentration camps such as Auschwitz. Sister Maria and her house was bursting with people, and many of them were Jews, and what she was doing was offering them help and shelter to these people to avoid persecution, but in the eyes of the Nazis this was treason. But it would not be long before she was arrested, as Gestapo agents raided her home, and she was imprisoned inside the Gestapo headquarters in Paris. She was then sent to Compiègne, and was then sent on to Ravensbruck Concentration Camp. This was an all-female camp which was established, and around 130,000 women were held there during the 6 years that it was in operation. It's believed that between 30,000 to 90,000 people died inside of Ravensbruck, and the conditions were brutal. One prisoner summed up the camp saying, "They didn't shoot the women, we were to die of hunger, misery and exhaustion. When we arrived at Ravensbruck, it was the worst. The first thing I saw was a cart with all the dead piled on it, their arms and legs hanging out, and mouths and eyes wide open. They reduced us to nothing. We didn't even feel like we had the value of cattle. You worked and you died." There were horrific medical experiments there, and the conditions were a disgrace, with prisoners being starved to death and being worked to death. Also executions occurred with the brutal SS guards, hanging and shooting these women who infringed on the camp's rules. Sister Maria remained at Ravensbrück for 2 years, and she endured longer than most of the other prisoners, and she was assigned to Block 27 in the southwestern corner of the camp, near to Block 31, which was made up of Russian women prisoners, who she did befriend. One former prisoner stated of Maria's time in Ravensbrück that she was never downcast, never. She never complained. She was full of good cheer, really good cheer. We had roll calls which lasted a great deal of time. We were woken at 3 in the morning, and we had to stand out in the open in the middle of winter until the barracks population was counted. She took all this calmly, and she would say, "Well, that's that, yet another day completed, and tomorrow it will be the same all over again. But one fine day this time will come all for an end." She was on good terms with everyone. Anyone in the block, no matter who it was, knew her on equal terms. She was a kind of person who made no distinction between people whether they held extremely progressive political views or had religious beliefs radically different from her own. She allowed nothing of secondary importance to impede her contact with people. Maria continued to talk religion to those inside the camp, and it gave many women hope even in the worst place on earth. She saw the chimneys from the crematoria as the only exit point from the camp, and she knew that she would be one day sent to her death and would be then burned inside the crematoria. She conducted very hard work, and as the Red Army were approaching from the west, the authorities inside Ravensbrück panicked and the conditions got worse. The population of each block rose, and disease was causing chaos, and at this point Sister Maria was getting very ill. She had to lie down at times at roll call, and she hardly spoke, suffering from exhaustion, but she never complained, and they said she was in continual prayer. However, the commandant of Ravensbrück received an order that anyone who could not work was to be killed. Sister Maria, with this order, was then selected to go to her death inside of the gas chambers. On the 30th of March 1945, she was selected to go on Good Friday to die. There are differing reports, as some say she took the place of another prisoner who was selected to die. But she made her way towards the gas chambers, and within minutes of being driven into the death room, she was executed and was killed. Sister Maria was a remarkable woman whose work inside of Paris helped to give many people what they needed. She today is regarded as a saint, being labelled Sister Mother Maria of Paris, and her actions helping the poor were a miracle, it's believed, but she was eventually caught by the Gestapo for housing refugees and Jews. Inside of Ravensbruck Concentration Camp, she met a horrific end, and her treatment as time went on was brutal. But within weeks of her death, the concentration camp had been liberated, and if she had just hung on a few more weeks, then she could have survived. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.